Fionna and Cake begins with a life that feels wrong in ways its protagonist cannot name. Fionna is not living an adventure. She is not saving anyone. She is working dead-end jobs, going on dates that lead nowhere, existing in a grey world that offers nothing she actually wants. The opening of the series shows us a woman in her late 20s who has done everything she was supposed to do and arrived nowhere, who followed the path and found it led to emptiness, who looks at her life and sees something that does not feel like hers. This is not the setup for a fantasy adventure. This is the setup for a story about depression, about stagnation, about the particular kind of despair that comes from living a life that works on paper while feeling completely dead inside. The genius of the series is that Fionna's malaise has an explanation within the fiction. She was created by Ice King as a fan fiction character designed for adventure in a world that does not exist, and is now living in a reality without magic, where her fundamental nature has no outlet. But this fictional explanation does not diminish the psychological truth the series depicts. The explanation gives form to something that many people feel without any such cosmic justification. The sense that you were meant for something else, that the life you are living is not the one you were supposed to have, that somewhere a wrong turn was taken, and now you are stuck in a version of existence that does not fit. Fionna's feeling of wrongness is both literally true within the story, and metaphorically true for anyone who has ever felt displaced in their own life. The self-sabotage that defines Fionna's existence becomes visible almost immediately. She does not fail because the world is unfair or because circumstances are against her. She fails because she makes choices that ensure failure, because she cannot accept the good things when they come, because she is more comfortable with disappointment than with the vulnerability that success would require. Her pattern is recognizable to anyone who has watched themselves make the same mistakes repeatedly, who has seen opportunity approach and found ways to push it away, who has wondered why they keep ending up in the same place when they keep trying to go somewhere different. Fionna is not a victim of her circumstances. She is, in ways she cannot fully see, the architect of her own stagnation. The relationship between Fionna's psychological patterns and her fictional origins raises questions the series takes seriously. Did Ice King create her with these self-destructive tendencies, or did they develop from living in a world that could not accommodate who she was made to be? Is her self-sabotage intrinsic to her character, or a response to an impossible situation? The series suggests both answers are true simultaneously. She was made a certain way, and she has also become who she is through experience. Nature and nurture combine in her as they combine in everyone, producing patterns that feel inevitable but that might, with enough understanding, be changed. The absence of magic in Fionna's world is not merely a plot device, but a psychological condition. She lives in a reality drained of wonder, where nothing transcendent is possible, where the ordinary is all there is. This absence shapes her depression, creates the flatness she experiences, produces the sense that nothing matters because nothing could matter in a world so thoroughly mundane. When magic eventually enters her life through Simon's portal, it is not just adventure that becomes possible, but meaning itself. The magic represents not merely power, but the return of significance to a life that had lost it. The specific texture of Fionna's depression, the way it manifests in her daily life, is rendered with uncomfortable accuracy. She goes through motions without feeling them. She responds to situations with a flatness that is not peace but absence. She has moments of trying, of believing that this time will be different, followed by returns to the same patterns that have always defined her. The series does not romanticize her condition or treat it as interesting damage that makes her special. It shows depression as it actually is: grinding, repetitive, a prison made of your own inability to want things strongly enough to pursue them. The jobs she cycles through, the relationships that never progress, the opportunities that somehow always slip away, are not bad luck, but the external manifestation of internal patterns she cannot see clearly enough to change. She arrives late, says the wrong thing, makes choices that seem small but accumulate into consequences. Each individual failure could be explained away, could be attributed to circumstance, could seem like just one of those things. But the pattern is visible to everyone except her, and perhaps to her too in moments she tries not to have, moments when she sees clearly how much of her trouble she has created. The dates that go nowhere deserve particular attention because they reveal her patterns most clearly. She chooses people who will disappoint her, responds to interest with ambivalence, finds reasons to dismiss anyone who might actually work out. When someone decent appears, she discovers flaws that might be manageable, treats hesitation as wisdom, convinces herself that the problem is them rather than her own terror of what success would require. She is not looking for love so much as looking for confirmation that love is not possible, collecting evidence for a thesis she wrote before the research began. The question of whether she wants to be happy, really wants it in ways that would sustain the effort happiness requires, is one the series raises without easy answers. Part of her wants change. Part of her is so adapted to dissatisfaction that satisfaction would feel like loss of self, would require becoming someone she does not know how to be. Her identity has formed around struggle and failure. Remove those, and who is she? This question is not abstract for anyone who has built themselves around their problems, who has discovered that solving them would mean losing the self that the problems created. The world itself, Fiona's world before the portals open, reflects her interior state in its visual design, its muted colours, its absence of the wonder that defines the main adventure time. This is not ooh, this is somewhere flatter, somewhere that looks like depression feels, somewhere that confirms Fiona's sense that nothing special is possible, because nothing special exists to be possible. The world and her experience of it are matched, each confirming the other, making it difficult to tell whether she is depressed because the world is dull, or whether the world seems dull because she is depressed. The opening episodes establish all of this before the adventure begins, taking time to let us feel the weight of Fiona's existence before offering escape from it. This pacing is deliberate, wants us to understand what she is escaping from so that the escape means something, wants us to feel the flatness so that the return of magic registers as the transformation it is. Many shows would rush past this setup to get to the adventure. Fionna and Cake lingers in the discomfort, trusts that the discomfort is part of the point. The specific failures we witness, the job she loses, the date that goes wrong, the small humiliations that accumulate, are carefully chosen to show patterns rather than incidents. Each failure rhymes with others, suggests that this has happened before and will happen again, establishes the repetitive quality of her self-destruction. We are not watching someone have a bad week. We are watching someone live out the same bad week over and over, trapped in loops she cannot see clearly enough to escape. The contrast with what she was created to be, a hero in a world of adventure, makes her current existence feel like even more of a betrayal. She was designed for something magnificent and has been given something ordinary. The gap between potential and actuality is where her suffering lives. the distance between who she was supposed to be and who she has become. This gap is not unique to fictional characters. It is recognizable to anyone who has felt that their life does not match their sense of what their life should be. Simon Petrikov arrives in Fionna's world as a man who has lost everything that losing could take from him. He was the Ice King for 1,000 years, mad and alone, his mind consumed by the crown that gave him power at the cost of his self. He has been cured. The crown no longer controls him. He remembers who he was, who he loved, what he lost. And this cure, this restoration of his mind, has not brought him peace, but a new kind of suffering. The suffering of clarity, of understanding fully what happened, and being unable to undo any of it. Simon is living proof that getting what you wanted can be its own form of devastation. The grief Simon carries is not simple mourning, but something more complex and corrosive. Betty is gone, transformed into a cosmic entity to save him, erased from existence in a way that leaves him unable to even properly grieve because her sacrifice was for him, because his cure cost her everything, because he cannot separate his restoration from her destruction. This guilt-soaked grief does not diminish over time, but compounds, becomes the defining feature of his existence, shapes every interaction and every choice. He is not merely sad, but poisoned by a sorrow that has no resolution, that offers no closure, that will persist as long as he does. Because its source is not a wound that can heal, but a condition of his continued existence. The question of who Simon is without the crown, without the Ice King persona, without the madness that defined him for centuries, is one he cannot answer, because the question itself may be unanswerable. He was Simon Petrikov, antiquarian and scholar, for a few decades. He was the Ice King for 1,000 years. The balance is absurdly weighted toward the identity he did not choose, the self that the crown imposed, the version of him that dominated his existence even if it was not truly him. To return to being Simon after so long being someone else is not restoration but recreation, an attempt to inhabit an identity that has become unfamiliar, to be a person he barely remembers how to be. His decision to travel to Fionna's world, to find the characters he created as the Ice King, represents an attempt to find meaning through connection to his lost self's creations. The fan fiction he wrote while mad was dismissed as embarrassing, as evidence of his broken mind, as something to be ashamed of. But those creations were also expressions of something real, desires for connection and adventure that persisted through his madness, longings that the crown could not fully suppress. Fionna and Cake are his children in a strange sense, born of his damaged imagination, and seeking them out is seeking out a part of himself he has been encouraged to discard. The parallel between Simon and Fionna becomes the structural core of the series. Both are living lives that feel wrong. Both are carrying pasts that shaped them in ways they struggle to understand. Both are engaged in patterns of self-destruction that they cannot fully see or stop. Simon's destruction is passive, a slow drowning in grief, a refusal to engage with life because engagement feels like betrayal of what was lost. Fionna's destruction is active, a series of choices that ensure she will never get what she needs. A pattern of self-sabotage that keeps her safe from the vulnerability that growth would require. They are mirrors of each other, different expressions of the same fundamental problem. People who cannot figure out how to live in the lives they have. The relationship that develops between them is not romantic, but something more essential. Recognition. Each sees in the other a version of their own struggle, a reflection of their own inability to move forward, a companion in stagnation. This recognition could enable them to help each other, or could enable them to enable each other, to find in their shared dysfunction a reason not to change. The series traces both possibilities, shows moments where their connection produces growth and moments where it produces mutual reinforcement of the patterns keeping them stuck. The dynamic between Simon and Fionna has the quality of two drowning people grabbing each other, potentially saving each other, or potentially pulling each other under. Simon needs purpose. Fionna represents a connection to the creative work his damaged self produced. Fionna needs validation. Simon represents someone who literally made her, who wanted her to exist, who gave her form when she was nothing. Their needs interlock in ways that could be healing or could be destructive, depending on whether they use their connection to grow or to remain safely miserable together. Simon's guilt is a poison he drinks daily, a suffering he maintains, because letting it go would feel like letting Betty go, like accepting what should not be acceptable, like moving on from a loss that does not deserve to be moved on from. His grief has become his connection to her, the suffering his way of staying faithful to what was lost. To feel better would be to forget, and to forget would be to betray. And so he maintains his pain as the last gift he can give to someone who can no longer receive gifts. This logic is mad, but also recognizable to anyone who has loved someone they have lost. The moments when Simon almost engages with life, almost allows himself to feel something other than grief, almost connects with the present rather than remaining trapped in the past, are followed by retreat, by renewal of the suffering that defines him, by what looks like choice to remain in pain. These retreats are not fully chosen, but not fully involuntary either, existing in the space between decision and compulsion, where so much self-destruction lives. He does not exactly want to suffer, but he is not ready to want to stop, and in that gap his patterns continue. The contrast between who Simon was and who he has become, between the scholar who found the crown and the shattered man who has been freed from it, raises questions about continuity of self that the series takes seriously. Is he the same person? He has the memories, both the decades before and the centuries during. But memory is not identity, and the person who lived those experiences might be different from the person who now remembers them. Simon is trying to be someone he may no longer be, inhabiting an identity that may have been destroyed by the very experiences he remembers. His relationship to the Ice King is particularly complex, because the Ice King was not simply a villain or a captor, but was, in some sense, also him. The fan fiction, the obsessions, the loneliness of that existence were his, experienced through a broken mind, but experienced nonetheless. To dismiss the Ice King entirely is to dismiss 1,000 years of his own existence, to treat most of his life as something that did not count, to amputate the majority of his experience as if it were not real. But to claim the Ice King is to claim the madness, the harm, the embarrassments that he would prefer to forget. Simon is caught between two impossible options: owning everything or disowning most of himself. The crown itself, now separate from him, represents the source of his suffering, but also, strangely, something he might miss. The crown gave him power, gave him identity, gave him a way of being in the world that was coherent, even if it was broken. Without it, he is free, but also formless, liberated, but also lost. The thing that destroyed him also defined him, and its absence leaves a hole that freedom does not automatically fill. He is learning that being cured is not the same as being healed, that removing the cause does not automatically remove the effects. The way Simon relates to Marceline in the aftermath of his restoration reveals the complexity of his grief. She knew him as both Simon and Ice King, loved him through both, maintained connection even when connection seemed impossible. But relating to her now means confronting all that his madness cost her, all the years she had to watch him be someone else, all the pain his transformation caused, someone who cared about who he had been. Their relationship is a mirror that shows him exactly what he lost and what his loss cost others. Cake's role in the series provides necessary contrast to Fiona's self-destructive patterns by embodying a different relationship to the same existential situation. Cake discovers, along with Fionna, that she is a fictional character living in a world without magic. But Cake's response to this discovery is fundamentally different from Fiona's response to her chronic dissatisfaction. Cake adapts. Cake finds ways to be happy with what exists rather than mourning what does not. Cake demonstrates that the same circumstances that produce Fiona's despair could produce a different outcome in someone with different patterns. This contrast is not the series saying Fionna should be more like Cake, that her depression is a choice she could simply decide to reverse. The contrast, instead, illuminates how much individual psychology shapes response to circumstance, how the same situation can produce radically different experiences depending on who is experiencing it. Cake is not better than Fionna. She is different from Fionna, wired in ways that make adaptation easier, less burdened by whatever combination of creation and experience produces Fiona's particular suffering. The contrast is observational rather than prescriptive, showing difference without judging it. Cake's relationship to Fionna mirrors in some ways Jake's relationship to Finn in the original series. The loyal companion, the voice of comfort and practicality, the anchor that keeps the protagonist grounded. But the dynamic is complicated by the series' darker tone, by the fact that Fiona's problems are not solved by adventure, but are internal in ways that external action cannot address. Cake can accompany Fionna, but cannot fix her. Cake can offer support, but cannot do the work that only Fionna can do. This limitation on what even the most loving companion can provide is part of the series' honesty about what support means and what it cannot mean. The magic that Cake gains when they enter the multiverse, her stretching powers restored, represents something recovered that Fionna cannot similarly recover. Cake gets her abilities back. Fionna does not become the hero she was written to be in any simple sense. This asymmetry is significant. The series is not about returning to a previous state of wholeness, but about finding new ways to exist that acknowledge what cannot be restored. Cake's powers return. Fionna must find something else, something that was never given to her, but that she must create for herself. The moments where Cake expresses frustration with Fiona's patterns, where she pushes back against the self-destruction she witnesses, represent the limits of patience that even love eventually encounters. Cake loves Fionna, but cannot endlessly absorb the consequences of Fiona's choices without response. This friction is realistic, shows that relationships are affected by self-sabotage, even when they survive it, that the people who care about us are also harmed by the harm we do to ourselves. Fiona's patterns have costs beyond herself, create damage that extends to everyone who loves her. The question of what Cake owes Fionna, how much support is appropriate before support becomes enabling, how to love someone who keeps hurting themselves without being destroyed by their self-destruction, runs beneath the surface of their relationship throughout the series. Cake does not have clear answers because there are no clear answers. She navigates as best she can, offering presence without offering solutions, maintaining connection without pretending that connection is cure. Her role models what it looks like to love someone through their worst patterns, while refusing to pretend those patterns are acceptable. The discovery that they are fictional characters affects Cake differently than it affects Fiona, partly because their different psychological structures produce different responses to the same information. For Fiona, the discovery confirms her sense that something has always been wrong, provides an explanation for the displacement she has always felt, turns vague dissatisfaction into concrete injustice. For Cake, the discovery is strange and disorienting, but not devastating, information to be integrated rather than a wound to carry. Cake can accept being fictional in ways Fiona cannot, not because Cake is less intelligent or less sensitive, but because Cake's relationship to existence is fundamentally more flexible. The humour Cake brings to the series, her lightness, even in dark situations, provides necessary relief from intensity that might otherwise be overwhelming. But her humour is not denial of the seriousness around her. It is a different way of relating to that seriousness, a strategy for survival that coexists with, rather than replaces acknowledgement of what is difficult. Cake is not pretending things are fine. She is finding ways to function despite things not being fine, modelling a relationship to difficulty that Fiona cannot access, but that exists as possibility within the world they share. The partnership between Fiona and Cake across the multiverse adventure draws on reserves of connection built over their entire existence together. Whatever else is uncertain, their relationship to each other is not. This certainty provides ground for everything else, a foundation that allows risks to be taken because the most important thing is not at risk. Fiona may doubt herself, may sabotage her chances at happiness, may struggle with the existential implications of her fictional nature, but she does not doubt Cake, and Cake does not doubt her, and this mutual certainty is the one stable point in a destabilized existence. The ways Cake challenges Fiona, refuses to accept her self-defeating narratives, pushes back against the interpretations that keep her stuck, represent love as something more than acceptance. Cake accepts Fiona, but does not accept everything Fiona tells herself about her situation. This distinction is crucial. Loving someone does not mean agreeing with their self-destructive beliefs, and the best friends are sometimes the ones who refuse to let you continue lying to yourself. Cake loves Fiona enough to disagree with her, to call out the patterns she sees, to risk the relationship by being honest about what the relationship allows her to see. The limits of what Cake can do for Fiona are also the limits of what anyone can do for anyone else who is struggling. Cake cannot make Fiona's choices for her. Cake cannot force her to change. Cake cannot protect her from the consequences of her patterns or from the pain that growth requires. All Cake can do is be present, offer perspective, and wait for Fiona to be ready for something different. This waiting is its own form of love, a patience that trusts Fiona's capacity for change, even when Fiona herself does not trust it. The physical comedy Cake provides, her stretching and morphing, and the visual possibilities her form allows, grounds the series in the Adventure Time tradition while serving the different tone of this story. She is recognizably from the same creative universe, but exists in a context that changes what her presence means. Her abilities, which in the original show might be purely delightful, here represent something recovered, something that was lost and found, something that connects the grey world where they started to the magical multiverse they now traverse. The relationship between Cake and Lord Monochromicorn, glimpsed in their homeworld, suggests that Cake has managed to build the kind of stable, loving relationship that Fiona cannot seem to achieve. This comparison could be painful for Fiona. if she let herself notice it, could become evidence for her thesis that something is specifically wrong with her. The series does not emphasize this comparison, but lets it exist in the background, trusting viewers to notice what Fionna might prefer not to see. Cake's faith in Fionna, her persistent belief that Fionna is capable of more than she has shown, is not naive optimism, but a position Cake has earned through knowing Fionna completely. She has seen Fionna at her worst, and still believes in her capacity for better. This faith is a gift that Fionna does not always know how to receive, evidence against her self-destructive narratives, that her self-destructive narratives work hard to dismiss. The multiverse that Simon's portal opens becomes the space where Fionna can see what she might have been, who she could be in worlds where things went differently, what versions of herself exist when circumstances change. These alternate Fionnas are not merely fun variations, but mirrors that reflect aspects of the original, possibilities that illuminate what about Fionna is essential and what is contingent, what she carries across all versions, and what changes when context changes. The multiverse is therapy through infinite comparison, a chance to see yourself from angles that a single life does not permit. Some versions of Fionna are successful where she has failed, happy where she is miserable, fulfilled where she is empty. These versions raise painful questions. Why them and not her? What did they do differently? Is she simply the version that got it wrong, the Fionna who made the bad choices, the iteration of herself that failed to become what the others became? These questions could be crushing, could confirm her worst beliefs about herself, could provide evidence that she is fundamentally the failure version in a multiverse of successes. Other versions of Fionna are worse off than she is, trapped in circumstances more terrible than hers, destroyed by forces she has avoided. These versions offer a different kind of perspective. Her life, for all its problems, is not the worst possibility. She has avoided fates that other versions suffered. Her particular combination of circumstances and choices, while painful, has not produced the catastrophes visible in other timelines. This perspective does not make her suffering less real, but contextualizes it within a range of possibility that includes much worse. The cumulative effect of multiverse exposure on Fionna is complex, not simply educational or therapeutic, but destabilizing in ways that must be integrated before they can be useful. Seeing too many versions of yourself, understanding too fully how contingent your particular existence is, can produce paralysis rather than liberation, can make every choice feel arbitrary when you know other versions chose differently, can dissolve the sense of self that coherent action requires. Fionna must learn to act, despite knowing that other Fionnas act differently, must commit to choices, despite understanding that those choices are not the only options. The Winter King represents the version that Fionna and Simon both fear, the one who kept his power and his mind, but lost his goodness, who found a way to have everything except the things that matter most, who solved the problems they struggle with through methods that make the solution worse than the problem. He is proof that there are fates worse than their current suffering, that the paths they might be tempted to take lead to places they do not want to go. His existence is cautionary, a demonstration of what competence without conscience produces. The scarab, hunting them across dimensions, represents external threat, but also the pressure of rules and expectations that Fionna has spent her life failing to meet. He is cosmic bureaucracy made manifest, the enforcer of how things are supposed to be, the punishment that awaits those who do not fit into proper categories. His pursuit is the externalization of the internal pressure Fionna has always felt. the sense that she is wrong, that she does not belong, that someone or something is coming to correct the error of her existence. Defeating him is not just survival, but a rejection of the premise that she is a mistake requiring correction. The rules the scarab enforces, the cosmic laws that say fictional characters should not cross into real dimensions, that anomalies must be eliminated, that everything should stay in its proper place, represent the kind of arbitrary authority that has always made Fionna feel inadequate. She has spent her life feeling like she is breaking rules she does not understand, failing to meet expectations she never agreed to, being judged by standards that seem designed to find her wanting. The scarab makes this feeling literal, gives it a face and a weapon, transforms the diffuse sense of wrongness into a specific enemy who can be confronted. The multiverse, as a concept, serves the series by making visible what is usually invisible. The contingency of any particular life, the dependence of outcomes on circumstances that could have been different, the role of chance and choice in producing the specific person you have become. Fionna seeing other Fionnas forces her to reckon with the fact that she is not the only possibility, that her failures are not the only outcomes, that her patterns are not the only patterns her basic nature could have produced. This reckoning is disorienting, but also potentially liberating. If she is not the only version, then she is not fated to be this particular version forever. The different versions of familiar characters throughout the multiverse, the ways that small changes produce radically different outcomes, suggest that identity is more fluid than it appears, that the self is constructed through circumstance as much as essence, that change is possible because the current self is not the only self that could exist. This is hopeful for someone like Fionna, trapped in patterns she cannot seem to break, because it suggests that breaking them would not mean becoming no one, but becoming someone else, a different version of herself that is still legitimately herself. The darker versions, the Fionnas who have suffered more or become worse, serve as warnings about where certain paths lead, what happens when certain choices are made, how badly things can go when patterns that are merely troublesome become truly destructive. Fionna can see in these versions the potential futures she is building through her current behaviour, the destinations her current trajectory is aimed at, the consequences that are not yet actual, but that become more likely with each repetition of the patterns that produce them. The adventure itself, the multiverse-spanning quest that the series depicts, is transformative, not because adventure is inherently healing, but because it forces Fionna out of the circumstances in which her patterns developed and are maintained. She cannot sabotage herself in the same ways when the situation is completely novel, cannot rely on familiar defences when nothing is familiar, cannot retreat to established patterns when no patterns fit. The adventure disrupts her self-destruction by disrupting everything, breaking the grooves that her life had worn into her until she had no choice but to follow them. The various worlds they visit, each with its own rules and aesthetics and versions of familiar characters, provide a tour through possibility that is also a tour through the self. Fionna, in different contexts, reveals different aspects of who she is, shows what changes and what remains constant, illuminates the core beneath the circumstances. This journey through the multiverse is also a journey through Fionna's potential, a demonstration of who she could be if things had been different, and who she might yet become if she can learn from what difference makes possible. The alliances they form across dimensions, the connections that develop with versions of characters they know and characters entirely new, create a network of relationship that Fionna has struggled to build in her home world. She is capable of connection, the multiverse proves. She can make friends, can inspire loyalty, can be someone others want to know. The isolation of her home life is not a reflection of her fundamental nature, but a product of patterns that other circumstances do not trigger. This is evidence she could use, if she were willing to accept it, that her loneliness is constructed rather than essential. The climactic confrontations the series builds toward test everything Fionna has learned, require her to be someone she has never successfully been, demand that she act rather than sabotage. These moments are the payoff for the journey, the places where change either happens or does not, where the accumulated experience either produces transformation or fails to overcome the patterns that have always won before. The series does not guarantee that Fionna will succeed. It brings her to the point where success is possible and lets us watch her choose. The Winter King emerges as the series' most disturbing figure, not because he is evil in any simple sense, but because he represents a coherent alternative to the suffering Simon and Fionna experience. A version of existence that solved the problems they struggle with through means that make the solution horrifying. He kept his mind when Simon lost his. He maintained power when Simon was consumed by it. He built a kingdom, achieved stability, created a life that works by every external measure. And he did all of this by becoming something monstrous, by sacrificing the parts of himself that Simon and Fionna are trying to preserve, by choosing functionality over integrity in ways that reveal what their struggles are actually about. The Winter King is Simon. If Simon had made different choices, if he had found a way to coexist with the crown rather than being destroyed by it, if he had prioritized his own survival over his own soul, this version of Simon is competent, powerful, in control of himself in ways that the Ice King never was. But this control was purchased at a price that the series presents as too high. The Winter King has lost something essential, has become someone who can do terrible things without flinching, has maintained his mind by abandoning his conscience. He is proof that there are fates worse than the suffering Simon has experienced, that some solutions to unbearable situations are worse than the situations themselves. The relationship between Simon and the Winter King forces Simon to confront what he might have become. What part of himself might have wanted to become this? What temptation the Winter King's path represents? It would be easier in some ways to be the Winter King. The grief would be gone. The guilt would be irrelevant. The endless suffering that defines Simon's current existence would be replaced by cold functionality that does not feel but also does not hurt. Simon looking at the Winter King is Simon looking at an escape route he chose not to take, a door he walked past that remains visible, a version of himself that still exists as possibility even if he has not actualized it. For Fionna, the Winter King represents what self-sabotage taken to its extreme might produce. A version of a person so focused on protecting themselves that they have destroyed everything worth protecting. Her patterns are different from his, but they share a common root in the attempt to avoid vulnerability, to protect against pain, to maintain control over circumstances that threaten to overwhelm. The Winter King shows where that logic leads when it is followed all the way. What you become when self-protection becomes the only value. What is lost when you succeed at never being hurt again. The confrontation with the Winter King is not simply a battle, but a reckoning with possibility, with the versions of themselves that Simon and Fionna have avoided becoming, but that remain present as paths not taken. Defeating him is not merely defeating an enemy, but rejecting what he represents, choosing their current suffering over his cold competence. affirming that the parts of themselves that hurt are also the parts worth preserving. The Winter King's defeat is the protagonist's choosing to remain broken rather than becoming whole in the way he is whole. The ice motif that connects the Winter King to Simon's history carries meaning that the series develops carefully. Ice preserves but also freezes, protects but also isolates, maintains but also prevents growth. The Winter King has frozen himself in a form that cannot be hurt because it cannot feel, has preserved himself by stopping the processes that would have changed him, has achieved stability through stasis. Simon's suffering is the opposite. He is unfrozen, feeling everything, changing constantly under the pressure of grief that will not let him rest. The choice between ice and thaw, between frozen stability and painful fluidity, is the choice the series asks its characters to make. The competence of the Winter King, his ability to rule and build and maintain, makes him seductive in ways that pure evil would not be. He is not offering Simon and Fionna something obviously bad. He is offering them something that works, that solves problems, that eliminates the suffering they have been unable to escape. The temptation is real because what he offers is real. A life without the pain they are experiencing, an existence that functions rather than constantly breaking down. Rejecting him requires rejecting something genuinely appealing, not merely rejecting something obviously terrible. The cruelty the Winter King demonstrates, the things he has done to build and maintain his kingdom, reveal what his solution actually costs. He has not merely numbed himself to pain, but numbed himself to everything, including the moral sense that would prevent him from causing pain in others. His kingdom is built on suffering he does not feel, maintained by cruelties he does not register, functional because he has disabled the parts of himself that would object to how it functions. The cost of his solution is not just personal, but extends to everyone around him, everyone affected by his frozen competence. The moment of confrontation between Simon and the Winter King is not merely action, but argument, a debate about what matters and why, a clash of philosophies embodied in physical conflict. Simon must articulate, to himself as much as to his opponent, why his suffering is preferable to the Winter King's cold peace, why feeling everything is better than feeling nothing, why the parts that hurt are also the parts that matter. This articulation is the real battle. The physical conflict is just its expression. The defeat of the Winter King, if it comes, cannot simply be the defeat of an enemy, but must be the affirmation of a way of being, the choice of one path over another when both paths are actually available. Simon and Fionna do not defeat the Winter King because he is wrong in some obvious way. They defeat him because they choose to be something other than what he has become, because they value something he has abandoned, because they prefer their suffering to his solution. The victory is not over evil, but over temptation, not over something obviously bad, but over something that would have been easier. The kingdom the Winter King has built, beautiful and functional and terrible, stands as monument to what competence without conscience can achieve. He has created order where there was chaos, built civilization where there was wilderness, imposed his will on reality in ways that the broken Ice King never could. These achievements are real. The suffering they cost is also real. The series asks whether the achievements justify the suffering, whether the functionality makes up for the monstrosity, whether a kingdom built on ice is worth the warmth that was sacrificed to build it. The final confrontation with the Winter King forces Simon to choose, once and finally, whether he would rather be who he is or become who the Winter King has become. This choice is not easy, because what Simon is includes suffering that seems endless, grief that provides no relief, guilt that compounds rather than diminishing. The Winter King offers an end to all of that. Simon must decide that the suffering is preferable to the alternative, that feeling terrible is better than feeling nothing, that his broken wholeness is worth more than the Winter King's functional fragmentation. For Fionna, the Winter King represents the end point of self-protection taken to its logical conclusion. She has spent her life avoiding vulnerability, constructing defenses against pain, sabotaging connections before they can hurt her. The Winter King has perfected this strategy, has built defenses so complete that nothing can reach him, has protected himself so thoroughly that no pain can touch him. Looking at him, she sees where her patterns lead if followed all the way. The revulsion she feels is partly revulsion at herself, at the version of herself that might someday become what he has become. The discovery that Fionna and Cake are fictional characters, created by Ice King's imagination and given existence in a world without magic, is the series' central existential crisis and its richest source of philosophical material. What does it mean to learn that you were made, that someone imagined you into being, that your existence began as someone else's fantasy? The series takes this question seriously, rather than treating it as merely a plot device, explores what such a discovery would actually mean for identity and agency, and the sense of having a life that is genuinely yours. Fionna's response to learning she is fictional is complicated by the fact that she has always felt fictional, has always experienced her life as somehow unreal, has always sensed that something fundamental was wrong without knowing what it was. The discovery confirms her suspicions, while giving them a form she never anticipated. She was right that something was wrong. The wrongness was her entire existence, her fundamental nature, the very fact of her being. This confirmation is both validating and devastating. She was not imagining her displacement, but the displacement is worse than she could have imagined. The question of whether fictional characters have real experiences, whether their suffering counts, whether their agency is genuine, is raised by the series without easy answers. Fionna feels real to herself. Her pain is real to her. Her choices feel like choices rather than scripts being followed. But she was written, was created to be a certain way, was given her personality and her patterns by someone else's imagination. The series suggests that the distinction between real and fictional may matter less than we assume, that what makes experience valid is not its origin, but its reality to the one experiencing it. Simon's role as Fionna's creator, even if he created her while mad and does not remember choosing to create her as she is, introduces complex questions about responsibility and relationship. He did not consciously decide to give her the patterns that make her suffer. The Ice King's imagination produced her, not Simon's deliberate choice. But he is still, in some sense, responsible for her existence, for the form that existence takes, for the fact that she exists at all. Their relationship is not quite parent and child, not quite author and character, not quite anything that existing categories fully capture. The question of whether Fionna can change, given that she was written a certain way, parallels questions about whether anyone can change, given that we are all shaped by forces outside our control. She did not choose her self-destructive patterns any more than anyone chooses the patterns that their genes and upbringing and circumstances produce. But she can, the series suggests, still take responsibility for what she does with those patterns, can still work to change, even if the starting point was not her choice. Her fictional origin makes visible what is true of everyone. We are all shaped by forces we did not choose, and we are all still capable of choosing what to do with what we have been given. The other fictional characters they encounter, the versions of familiar faces living in Fionna's world, raise the question of whether some forms of existence are more real than others. They seem to have full lives, full experiences, full interiority. But they were also written, also created, also exist because someone imagined them. The multiverse the series depicts is full of beings whose reality is uncertain, whose existence depends on forces beyond their understanding, whose lives are real to them regardless of how they appear from outside. This uncertainty about the reality of others is, the series suggests, not unique to fictional beings, but present in every encounter, every relationship, every attempt to understand someone else's experience. The existential weight of being a creation rather than a creator, of having been made rather than simply being, presses on Fionna throughout the series. She did not choose to exist. She did not choose the form her existence takes. She did not choose the patterns that make her suffer, or the world that makes those patterns painful. Everything about her was determined by someone else, by a broken mind that imagined her into being without considering what being would feel like from the inside. This lack of original agency could be paralyzing, could be grounds for despair, could justify giving up entirely. But the series suggests that the distinction between created and creator may not matter as much as it seems. Everyone is made by forces they did not choose. Everyone inherits patterns from sources beyond their control. Everyone finds themselves existing in a form they did not select, in circumstances they did not create, with tendencies they did not ask for. Fionna's situation is more dramatic than most because her creation was literal rather than metaphorical, but the existential challenge is the same. What do you do with an existence you did not request? In a form you did not design? With patterns you did not choose? The answer the series offers is that existence can be claimed even when it was given, that agency can emerge even from determined origins, that the self can be authored even by those who were themselves authored. Fionna did not make herself, but she can decide what to do with the self she has been given. She did not choose her patterns, but she can choose to work against them. She did not create her existence, but she can create meaning within it. This is not an easy answer, but it is a livable one, a way of claiming what was given, rather than being defeated by the fact that it was given. The question of what Simon owes Fionna as her inadvertent creator becomes a question the series treats with nuance rather than easy answers. He did not mean to make her suffer. He did not consciously design her self-destructive patterns, but he is still, in some sense, responsible for her existence and for the form that existence takes. Their relationship must navigate this complex causation, must find a way to be genuine despite the asymmetry of creator and created, must build something real from materials that include an origin story neither of them fully chose. The fan fiction itself, the Ice King's stories about Fionna and Cake, becomes an artifact that the series treats with complexity rather than simple embarrassment. It was created by a broken mind, but it was also created by a mind that wanted something, that longed for adventure and connection and meaning that the Ice King's actual existence could not provide. The stories are sad in their origin, but also beautiful in what they reveal about desire that persists even through madness, about imagination that refuses to die even when the mind that houses it is dying. Fionna reading about herself encountering the stories that made her is a strange and disorienting experience the series depicts with appropriate weight. She is learning about herself through the lens of someone who created her but did not know her, who imagined her but could not fully imagine what it would be like to be her. The stories contain her but also miss her, capture something true while getting much wrong. Her relationship to these origin stories is her relationship to herself, to the parts of her that were designed, and the parts that emerged despite the design. The question of authorship and authority, of whether being someone's creator gives you power over them, runs through the series' treatment of Fionna's fictional status. Simon created her but does not own her. Ice King wrote her but did not determine her. The origin gives information but does not give control. Fionna is her own, regardless of where she came from, and claiming that autonomy is part of what her journey requires. She was created, but she is not merely a creation. She has become something more than what she was made to be. Gary Prince, the gender-swapped version of Bubblegum, who exists in Fionna's world, provides a romantic interest whose function in the narrative is more complex than typical love interests. He is not simply someone for Fionna to end up with, but a test of her patterns, an opportunity to see whether she can relate to someone decent without sabotaging the relationship, a measure of how much she has or has not changed. The series uses romance not as reward but as diagnostic, showing through her response to Gary what she has learned and what she has yet to learn. The attraction between Fionna and Gary is genuine, not manufactured by circumstance or forced by plot. They connect in ways that feel real, share moments that matter, build something that could become significant if Fionna allows it to. But allowing it is exactly what Fionna struggles to do, what her patterns have prevented her from doing throughout her life, what the series tracks as one measure of her development. Gary is not the solution to her problems. He is the context in which her problems become visible, the situation that reveals whether her journey has produced any change. The vulnerability that genuine romantic connection requires is exactly what Fionna's self-protective patterns have been designed to prevent. Opening to someone, risking rejection, allowing another person to matter enough that their departure would hurt, these are the things her self-sabotage has always saved her from. The dangers her patterns have always circumvented. Gary represents the invitation to stop being safe, to risk the pain that connection inevitably involves, to choose the possibility of happiness over the certainty of protected misery. The contrast between how Fionna relates to Gary and how she has related to romantic interests in her previous life shows what has and has not changed through her multiverse journey. She is still hesitant, still prone to the interpretations that have always derailed her relationships. But she is also more aware of what she is doing, more able to notice her patterns as they operate, more capable of choosing differently, even when differently is terrifying. The relationship with Gary is not smooth or easy, but it is, potentially, different from everything that came before. The possibility that Fionna might get what she wants, might build a relationship that works, might actually be happy, is presented as frightening rather than simply desirable. Happiness would require her to become someone she does not know how to be, to maintain something she has never successfully maintained, to stop using the self-protective strategies that have defined her entire existence. The fear of success is as real as the fear of failure, and the series acknowledges that getting what you want can be as terrifying as not getting it. Gary's own complexity, his status as a fictional character with his own patterns and struggles, means that the relationship is not simply about Fionna learning to accept love, but about two complicated beings trying to figure out how to be together. He is not a reward for her growth, but another person with his own history and his own difficulties, who must also choose vulnerability, who must also risk pain, who must also decide whether connection is worth what connection costs. Their potential relationship is mutual, reciprocal, between equals rather than between protagonist and prize. The moments of genuine connection between Fionna and Gary, when both are simply present with each other, without the interference of patterns and defences, show what is possible when self-sabotage temporarily releases its grip. These moments are precious precisely because they are fragile, because the patterns that interfere with connection are always ready to return, because the work of relationship is never finished but ongoing. The series does not pretend that one good moment solves everything. It shows that good moments are possible and that they must be continually chosen against forces that would prevent them. The question of whether Fionna can sustain a relationship, can maintain connection over time, rather than just achieving it momentarily, remains open throughout the series. Connection in crisis is different from connection in ordinary life. The intensity of their adventure creates conditions where normal patterns might not apply, where the stakes are high enough to override usual defences. Whether what develops under these extraordinary circumstances can survive translation to ordinary life is a question the series takes seriously, acknowledges as uncertain, treats as genuinely unresolved rather than guaranteed. The symbolic significance of Gary as a prince, as someone associated with power and position and traditional markers of desirability, complicates what he represents for Fionna. She has always felt unworthy, always believed herself not good enough for the things she wanted. A prince, wanting her challenges that belief directly, confronts her self-image with evidence that contradicts it. Her response to this contradiction, whether she can accept that someone like Gary could want someone like her, becomes part of what the series explores. The gender dynamics of Fionna and Cake, with Fionna as the adventurer and Gary as the prince, invert traditional patterns in ways that the series plays with without making heavy-handed. Fionna does not need rescuing. Gary does not need to prove himself through violence or conquest. Their potential relationship is not organised around traditional roles, but around mutual recognition, shared vulnerability, the willingness of each to see and be seen by the other. The series suggests that real relationship requires abandoning the scripts that usually organise romance, becoming two people rather than two roles. The ending the series provides for Fionna and Gary, whatever that ending is, matters less than what their relationship reveals about who Fionna has become. Whether they end up together or apart, whether their connection survives the end of the adventure or dissolves when circumstances change, the relationship has served its function in showing what Fionna is capable of, how far she has come, what she still struggles with. Gary is important not as destination, but as demonstration, not as prize, but as mirror. The vulnerability Fionna shows with Gary, when she shows it, represents something genuinely new in her experience. She has spent her life defending against exactly this kind of openness, constructing barriers that prevent exactly this kind of exposure. To let someone see her as she is, without the defenses and performances that usually mediate her relationships, requires a kind of courage she has not previously been able to muster. Each moment of real vulnerability is a victory over patterns that have dominated her entire existence. The fear that remains even when she is trying to be open, the defenses that reassert themselves even when she is working against them, shows how deeply her patterns are rooted and how long the work of changing them will take. She does not become someone new over the course of the series. She becomes someone who is beginning to change, who is starting to work against what has always controlled her, who is in process rather than transformed. This incompleteness is honest about what change actually involves. The relationship with Gary also tests Simon's capacity for something like fatherly care, watching someone he in some sense created try to build a life that includes love. His investment in Fionna's happiness, his hope that she will find what has eluded her, reflects both his guilt about creating her and his genuine affection for what she has become. He cannot undo the patterns his imagination gave her, but he can support her as she works to overcome them. The way the series handles romance, as one element among many rather than as the central point, reflects its maturity about what relationships can and cannot provide. Gary is not the solution to Fionna's problems. He is a context in which her problems become visible and can potentially be worked on. The series refuses the fantasy that the right relationship fixes everything, insists instead that relationships require people who have already begun the work of becoming capable of relationship. Fionna must change herself. Gary cannot change her for her. The Scarab's enforcement of cosmic law, his pursuit of Fionna and Cake across dimensions, represents the externalization of the internal critic that has shaped Fionna's entire life. He believes she is wrong, should not exist, must be corrected or eliminated. This belief mirrors what she has always believed about herself, the sense that she is a mistake that someone should notice and fix, that she does not deserve to exist in the form she exists, that any moment someone or something will arrive to enforce her removal. The Scarab is her self-hatred given form and power, the voice in her head become a literal pursuer with literal weapons. The rules the Scarab enforces are presented as arbitrary, as powerful but not right, as having authority without having legitimacy. He is certain that fictional characters crossing into real dimensions violates something fundamental, that the order of the multiverse requires their elimination, that his pursuit is righteous because it serves principles he has never questioned. This certainty mirrors the certainty of all arbitrary rules, all systems that tell certain people they do not belong, all authorities that enforce exclusion without examining whether exclusion is just. Fionna's journey toward confronting the Scarab is also a journey toward confronting the part of herself that agrees with him, that believes she is wrong, that accepts the premise that she should not exist. She cannot defeat him externally while still agreeing with him internally. She cannot fight for her right to exist while still believing she has no right to exist. The battle with the Scarab requires her to first win the battle with her own self-rejection, to claim legitimacy she has never felt entitled to insist on her own value when everything inside her has always said she has none. The Scarab's rigidity, his inability to question the rules he enforces, his reduction of everything to categories and violations, represents a way of being that Fionna must reject to survive. He cannot see her as a person because his framework does not include personhood for beings like her. He cannot value her existence because his values do not admit the possibility that beings like her have value. Defeating him requires not just physical victory, but the assertion of a different framework, a different set of values, a different understanding of what matters and why. The irony that the Scarab is himself serving a system without examining it, is himself following rules without questioning them, is himself as trapped as anyone he pursues, becomes visible as the series develops. He is not free. He is constrained by his certainties. imprisoned by his categories, unable to see beyond the framework he enforces. His power is real, but his freedom is not, and Fiona's rebellion against him is also a rebellion against the kind of existence he represents, defined entirely by external rules, without room for the self-determination that makes existence meaningful. The climactic confrontation with the scarab brings together everything the series has explored about authority, legitimacy, self-worth, and the right to exist. Fionna must stand against a being who represents everything that has ever told her she was wrong, must insist on her own validity against a force dedicated to her elimination, must become someone who believes she deserves to exist in order to fight for her existence. The external battle is won or lost in the internal space first, in the decision about whether she will accept the scarab's premise or reject it, whether she will internalize his judgment or assert her own. The rules-based worldview the scarab represents has its own tragedy that the series acknowledges without fully sympathizing with. He has given his existence to enforcement, has found his meaning in maintaining order, has built his identity around being the one who upholds what must be upheld. The discovery that the rules might be wrong, that his life's work might have been service to something unjust, would destroy him in ways that Fiona's discovery of her fictional status did not destroy her. His rigidity is also his vulnerability, his certainty also his fragility. The philosophical argument between Fionna and the scarab, expressed through action and confrontation rather than explicit debate, concerns the basis of legitimacy itself. Does existence require permission? Must beings justify themselves to authorities who claim the right to judge? Is there a cosmic order that determines who belongs and who does not? Or is the sense of belonging something that can be claimed rather than granted? The series sides with Fionna, but gives the scarab's position real weight, presents the conflict as genuine rather than one-sided. The victory over the scarab, if it comes, cannot simply be physical, but must be the triumph of one understanding of existence over another. Fionna wins by being right, by embodying a way of being that the scarab's framework cannot accommodate, by insisting on her reality so completely that his denial of it becomes irrelevant. The scarab has power to destroy her body, but not power to determine her value, authority over her physical existence, but not over the meaning of that existence. The battle is about who gets to decide what matters. The aftermath of confronting the scarab, whatever form it takes, leaves Fionna changed in ways that confrontation with external enemies always changes the people who survive them. She has stood for something, has fought for her right to exist, has externalized the internal battle and won it in a form she can see and touch. This does not eliminate the internal critic that the scarab represented, but it changes her relationship to that critic, makes it something she has defeated once and might defeat again, rather than something she has always surrendered to. The series uses the scarab to give external form to internal struggle in ways that make the internal struggle visible and therefore addressable. Self-hatred is hard to fight because it has no face, no location, no moment of confrontation. The scarab has all of these, can be seen and faced and battled. Defeating him does not cure the self-hatred he represents, but it provides a narrative that can be remembered, a victory that can be referenced, a demonstration that the voice saying she should not exist can be answered and overcome. The scarab's eventual fate, whatever the series provides for him, carries meaning beyond simple narrative resolution. If he is destroyed, the destruction represents the rejection of his framework, the triumph of Fionna's self-assertion over his denial of her validity. If he is transformed or redeemed, that represents the possibility that even rigid systems can change, that even enforcers of unjust rules can learn to see beyond them. His fate completes the argument the series has been making about authority, legitimacy, and the right to exist. The battle against the scarab is also the battle Fionna fights against everyone who has ever made her feel worthless, every system that has told her she does not belong, every voice, internal and external, that has questioned her right to exist and be happy. He is the final exam for everything she has learned, the test of whether she can stand for herself when everything is at stake. Passing this test does not guarantee happiness, but it proves something she has never proven before, that she believes she deserves to exist. The resolution of the Scarab storyline cannot provide easy answers because the series has not offered easy answers throughout. The critic does not disappear when you defeat it once. The patterns do not dissolve when you achieve one victory. But the victory still matters, still changes what is possible, still demonstrates that change can happen even when change is hard. Fionna, after the scarab, is not finished with her struggle, but she is further along than she was, and further along is all that any moment of growth can provide. The grief that Simon carries throughout the series is not merely sadness, but a complex structure of feeling that includes guilt, rage, confusion, and a desperate longing that has nowhere to go. Betty is not simply dead, but transformed, not simply gone, but somewhere beyond reach, not simply lost, but lost because of him, for him, in an attempt to save him that he did not ask for and cannot undo. This is not clean grief that can move through stages toward acceptance. This is grief tangled with responsibility, loss complicated by causation, mourning that cannot separate the beloved from the self that the beloved was trying to save. The question of whether Simon should feel guilty, whether Betty's choice was her own and therefore not his fault, whether responsibility for someone else's sacrifice can ever truly belong to the person they sacrificed for, runs beneath his suffering throughout the series. He tells himself he is not to blame. Others tell him he is not to blame. But the feeling persists regardless of what logic suggests, because grief is not logical, because the heart does not accept arguments the way the mind does, because knowing you should not feel guilty does not make the guilt go away. The way Simon's grief manifests as paralysis, as inability to move forward, as repetitive return to the same painful places, reflects how grief actually works for many people. He is stuck not because he is weak, but because grief is sticky, because loss creates grooves that are hard to escape, because the mind keeps returning to what it cannot accept in hopes that this time the return will somehow change what happened. His stuckness is not failure but process, the way grief moves when it moves at all, the circling that precedes any forward motion. The memories of Betty that haunt Simon are both comfort and torment, connection to what was lost, and reminder that it is lost, the only way he can still be with her, and the constant confirmation that being with her is no longer possible. He cannot stop remembering because remembering is all he has left. He cannot bear to remember because remembering is unbearable. This impossible position, needing what hurts, unable to stop doing what he cannot stand to do, is the structure of grief that has not yet found its way through. The Fionna and Cake adventure offers Simon something that his grief has prevented him from having: a purpose. Not purpose that replaces Betty or makes her loss acceptable, but purpose that exists alongside grief, that gives him something to do while he is still suffering, that provides forward motion, even when forward motion feels impossible. The quest to help Fionna becomes a reason to continue existing, when grief has made existence feel pointless, a project that matters when nothing seems to matter, a direction when he has been wandering in circles. The relationship between helping Fiona and processing his grief is not simple substitution, but complex interaction. Helping her does not make him stop grieving, but it does give him something other than grief to think about, someone other than himself to focus on, a set of problems that are not his problems, and that therefore provide relief from the relentlessness of his own suffering. This is not escape from grief, but management of it, finding ways to continue functioning while grief does its slow work. The moments when Simon's grief breaks through, when the management fails and the raw loss is suddenly present, punctuate the adventure with reminders that his suffering has not ended just because he has found something to do. He is helping Fiona while grieving. He is moving forward while still stuck. He is functional while still broken. The series holds these contradictions together, shows that people can be multiple things simultaneously, can act while paralyzed, can help while suffering, can move forward while still looking back. The specific quality of Simon's grief, its texture and temperature, is rendered with care throughout the series. It is not melodramatic but quiet, not explosive but pervasive, not something that happens in dramatic moments, but something that colours everything, that is present even when it is not the focus, that shapes his responses to situations that have nothing directly to do with Betty. Grief of this depth becomes a way of seeing the world, a filter through which everything passes, a constant companion that changes how all experience is experienced. The relationship between Simon's grief and his sense of identity is complex because Betty was so central to who he understood himself to be. He was Simon who loved Betty, Simon who was with Betty, Simon whose life included Betty. Without her, he is not sure who he is struggling to construct an identity that does not depend on her presence, is learning to be someone he never expected or wanted to be. His grief is not only for her, but for the version of himself that existed in relationship to her, the self that her loss has made impossible. The possibility of moving through grief, of eventually arriving somewhere other than where he is now, exists in the series as hope that is not yet realized. The series does not show Simon completing his grief work, does not pretend that an adventure could fix what Betty's loss broke. Instead, it shows him in process, moving but not arrived, better than he was, but not yet well. This incompleteness is honest about how grief actually works, how long it takes, how uncertain the timeline is for anyone going through it. The way other characters respond to Simon's grief, sometimes with patience and sometimes with frustration, reflects the difficulty of loving someone who is suffering in ways you cannot fix. They want to help him. They cannot help him. Not really, not in ways that address the root of his pain. They can only be present while he suffers, can only offer companionship that does not cure, can only wait while his grief moves at its own pace toward a destination no one can see. The particular cruelty of Simon's situation is that Betty's sacrifice was for him, which means his grief is inseparable from gratitude, which means mourning her loss requires also mourning the fact that her loss was a gift, which means every feeling is complicated by its opposite. He cannot simply grieve. He must grieve while also being grateful, must mourn while also being the reason for the death he mourns. This complexity does not make his grief worse so much as it makes it more tangled, harder to process, resistant to the simplifications that processing usually requires. The question of what Simon's life looks like going forward, what shape his existence takes when it includes this grief permanently, is one the series takes seriously without pretending to answer fully. He will never be who he was before Betty. He will never be free of the grief her loss created. He must build a life that includes this pain as a permanent feature, must find ways to be that accommodate rather than eliminate what he carries. This is not failure to heal, but recognition that some wounds do not close, that some losses are integrated rather than overcome. The role of Fionna in Simon's grief process is not to fix him, but to demonstrate that engagement with life remains possible, that purpose can coexist with pain, that meaning can be found even when the most meaningful thing has been lost. She does not make his grief better. She gives him something to do while grieving, somewhere to direct energy that grief alone would consume, someone to care about when grief has made caring seem impossible. The hope that Simon's arc offers viewers who are grieving is not that grief ends, but that life with grief is possible, that functioning while grieving is achievable, that the future includes not the end of pain, but the integration of it into a life that continues to move. This is modest hope, but it is realistic, grounded in what the series shows, rather than in what wishful thinking would prefer. The self-sabotage that defines Fionna's life is not random but patterned, not senseless, but following a logic that makes sense when understood from the inside. She sabotages because sabotage is safe, because failure you created is more controllable than success you cannot control, because the vulnerability of having something good is more frightening than the familiarity of having nothing. Her patterns are protective, even when they protect her from what she needs, defensive, even when the defense has become the main source of damage. The specific ways she sabotages, the particular mechanisms she uses to ensure that good things do not happen, become visible through the series' careful attention to her behavior. She arrives late, says the wrong thing, picks fights about nothing, withdraws when closeness threatens, finds flaws that justify departure. Each mechanism is small enough to seem like accident, to seem like just how things happened rather than how she made them happen. But the accumulation reveals intention beneath the apparent chaos, design beneath the apparent dysfunction. The origins of her self-sabotage, whether traced to her fictional nature or to experiences within her fictional existence, are less important than the present reality of the patterns and their effects. She did not choose to be this way, but she is this way, and understanding why does not automatically enable change. The series is honest about this. Insight is not cure. Understanding is not transformation. Knowing why you do something does not automatically enable you to stop doing it. Fionna's awareness of her patterns grows through the series, but awareness alone is not sufficient to change them. The fear beneath the self-sabotage, the terror that drives the protective mechanisms, is the fear of being seen and found wanting, of being known and rejected, of getting what you want and discovering that you still are not happy, that the problem was always you and not your circumstances. This fear is so profound that it makes failure preferable to the risk of success, makes sabotage preferable to the vulnerability of trying, makes the certainty of disappointment preferable to the uncertainty of hope. The adventure Fionna undertakes does not cure her self-sabotage, but creates conditions under which sabotage becomes more difficult. When survival is at stake, when the situation demands engagement, when there is no space for the usual patterns to operate, she discovers that she is capable of things her patterns have prevented. These discoveries do not eliminate the patterns, but provide evidence against them. demonstrate that she is more than her self-destruction, reveal capacities that her protective mechanisms have hidden, even from herself. The question of whether Fionna will relapse, whether the patterns will reassert themselves when the adventure ends and ordinary life resumes, hangs over the series' conclusion. The series does not pretend that one adventure solves everything, that the changes she has experienced are permanent, that she has been fixed by her journey. Instead, it offers the more realistic hope that she has learned something, has changed something, has moved some distance from where she started, even if the destination is not yet reached. The relationship between her self-sabotage and her fictional origins is one the series treats with nuance. Did Ice King write her to be self-destructive, or did she develop these patterns from living in a world that did not fit her design? The answer is probably both, origin and experience combining to produce what she is. But the answer also does not matter as much as what she does now, whether she uses her origins as excuse or as information, whether she blames her creator or takes responsibility for her own continuation. The moments when Fionna catches herself sabotaging, when she sees the pattern as it is happening rather than only afterward, represent real progress even when they do not lead to different behavior. Awareness is the first step, the necessary precondition for change, even when awareness is not sufficient to produce change immediately. She is learning to see herself more clearly, and this clarity, painful though it is, creates the possibility of eventually acting differently. The cost of her self-sabotage, the accumulated damage it has done to her life, becomes visible through the series in ways she cannot ignore. The jobs she has lost, the relationships she has destroyed, the opportunities she has squandered, all add up to a life that is much less than it could have been. Seeing this cost clearly, without the defenses that usually soften it, is part of what the adventure provides. Perspective that her normal existence does not allow. The question of whether she wants to change, really wants it, rather than just wishing things were different, is one the series takes seriously. Change requires wanting it enough to do the difficult work, to tolerate the discomfort of new patterns, to persist through the failures that learning involves. Wishing is passive, wanting is active. The series tracks Fionna's movement from wishing things were different to actually wanting to make them different, the shift from complaint to commitment that real change requires. The support she receives from Cake and Simon and others provides necessary conditions for change, but does not provide change itself. They can encourage her, can believe in her, can offer perspectives she cannot access alone, but they cannot change for her, cannot do the work that only she can do, cannot want on her behalf. Their support matters and is also insufficient, necessary, but not sufficient. Part of what change requires, but not all of it. The internal monologue that accompanies Fionna's self-sabotage, the voice that tells her she does not deserve good things, that predicts failure before she has tried, that interprets every situation in ways that justify withdrawal, is rendered visible through the series in ways that make it recognizable to anyone who has experienced similar patterns. The voice is not her. It is something she has internalized, a critic that has taken up residence inside her and passes its judgments off as her own thoughts. Learning to distinguish between the voice and herself is part of what growth requires. The exhaustion of maintaining self-destructive patterns, the energy it takes to constantly work against yourself, is something the series acknowledges. Self-sabotage is not passive. It requires effort, requires constant vigilance against the good things that might slip through if she let her guard down. She is tired because destroying her own life is hard work, because the defenses she maintains demand constant maintenance. The possibility that letting go might actually be easier than holding on is something she has not yet fully considered. The glimpses of who Fionna might be without her self-sabotage, the moments when the patterns release and she acts from something other than defense, show a person who is capable and brave and worth knowing. These glimpses are evidence against the thesis her patterns have taught her, proof that she is more than her defenses, demonstration that the self she is protecting from life is actually capable of living. The adventure multiplies these glimpses until they become harder to dismiss. The question the series leaves open is whether Fionna will be able to sustain the changes the adventure initiates, whether the glimpses will become the norm rather than the exception, whether she will return to her patterns or build something new. This openness is honest about how uncertain change actually is, how often people revert to familiar dysfunction even after seeming to break through, how much ongoing work is required to make temporary change permanent. The series suggests that change is possible without promising that change has happened permanently. This is the most honest position, acknowledging both the real progress Fionna has made and the real uncertainty about whether that progress will last. Viewers who are themselves working on self-destructive patterns can find in this honesty both encouragement and realism. The question of identity that Fionna and Cake raises, of what makes someone who they are and whether that identity can change, runs through every aspect of the series. Fionna was written a certain way, was given patterns by her creator, was designed to be who she is. But she has also lived, has had experiences that her creator did not anticipate, has become something beyond what was originally written. The tension between origin and development, between what was given and what has been made, is the tension at the heart of any inquiry into personal identity. Simon faces a parallel question from a different direction. He was someone, then became someone else through the crown's corruption, then was restored to something like who he was before. But 1,000 years of being Ice King cannot be erased, cannot be treated as if they did not happen, cannot be excluded from who he is now. He is Simon, and he was Ice King, and both of these are true, and figuring out how to be a coherent person who contains both truths is his central challenge. The multiverse the series depicts multiplies these identity questions by showing versions of the same person who have become radically different through different circumstances. Which version is the real one? Are all of them real? Is there some essential core that persists across all versions? Or is identity entirely a product of circumstance? The series does not answer these questions definitively, but uses them to unsettle easy assumptions about who we are and why. The relationship between Fionna and her alternate versions forces her to confront the contingency of her own identity, the ways she might have been different, the versions of herself she might yet become. This confrontation could be paralyzing, could make choice seem arbitrary, could dissolve the sense of self that coherent action requires. Or it could be liberating, could reveal that identity is not fixed, could demonstrate that change is possible because the self that exists now is not the only self that could exist. The choices the series emphasizes, the moments when characters decide who they will be, suggest that identity is partly a matter of decision, that we author ourselves through what we do, even if we did not author the circumstances in which we act. Fionna's choices matter not because they were inevitable, but because they were chosen, because she could have chosen differently, because her identity is being created through her actions rather than merely expressed by them. The ending the series provides, whatever form it takes, must address these identity questions, not by resolving them, but by showing how characters can live with their irresolution. Identity remains uncertain, contingent, multiple. Life requires acting anyway, requires choosing who to be without certainty about what choice means, requires creating a self from materials that include everything that has been given and everything that has been done with what was given. The practical implications of the series' treatment of identity for viewers who struggle with who they are and whether they can change are significant. The series suggests that you are not only what you were made to be, that experience adds to origin, that choice can modify what was given. It suggests that identity is not fixed but fluid, not determined but ongoing, not finished but always in process. For viewers trapped in patterns they did not choose, this suggestion offers hope that is not naive but realistic, grounded in the series' honest treatment of how difficult change actually is. The relationship between identity and action that the series depicts suggests that who we are is partly constituted by what we do. That identity is performed as much as possessed, that becoming someone different requires acting differently until the action becomes natural. This is not fake it till you make it optimism, but a serious philosophical position about the relationship between being and doing, about how change actually happens in human lives. The continuity that persists through change, the sense in which someone remains themselves, even while becoming different, is also something the series takes seriously. Fionna changing is still Fionna. Simon processing his grief is still Simon. The change does not destroy identity, but develops it, does not replace the self, but grows it, does not make them unrecognizable, but makes them more fully who they might always have been. The fear of change that both Fionna and Simon experience, the terror of becoming someone unfamiliar, is presented sympathetically, even as the series insists that change is necessary. Staying the same feels safe, even when staying the same is killing you. Becoming different feels dangerous, even when different would be better. This fear is not irrational, but it is also not a reason to stop, is not something to be dismissed, but is also not something to be obeyed. The multiverse provides a unique resource for thinking about identity because it shows alternate versions that are both same and different, that share something essential while diverging in what has developed. These alternate versions are evidence that identity is not singular, that the self contains multitudes, that who you are includes who you might have been and who you might yet become. This expanded sense of identity is potentially liberating for anyone trapped in a single version of themselves that they do not like. The question of authenticity that identity raises, of what it means to be true to yourself when the self is multiple and changing, is one the series complicates rather than answers. Being true to yourself cannot mean being true to a single fixed version, because no such version exists. It must mean something more like being true to the process of becoming, honouring the ongoing creation of self rather than defending a self that was created once and must be preserved unchanged. The relationship between Fionna's identity and her fictional status raises questions that apply beyond fictional characters to anyone whose sense of self has been shaped by forces outside their control. She did not choose to be who she is, neither did anyone else. The feeling of having been made, rather than having made oneself, is not unique to beings who were literally written by someone else, but is shared by everyone who recognizes how much of what they are came from circumstances They did not select the ending identity arrives at through the series, if it arrives anywhere, is not a destination, but a new starting point. Not the end of questions, but the establishment of better questions. Who is Fionna? Who is Simon? These questions are not answered by the series so much as transformed, made richer and more complex, opened up rather than closed down. The series teaches its viewers to ask identity questions differently, not seeking final answers, but accepting ongoing inquiry. The practical implications for viewers of this approach to identity are significant. If identity is ongoing creation, rather than fixed essence, then change is always possible, regardless of how stuck you feel. If identity includes all the versions you might have been, then you are larger than your current patterns, more than the self-sabotage or grief that seems to define you. The series offers not a solution to identity questions, but a different relationship to them. The comfort the series provides about identity is not that you can become anyone you want to be, which is false, but that you are not limited to who you currently are, which is true. Change is possible, even if unlimited change is not. Growth is possible, even if becoming unrecognizably different is not. The self can develop even as it remains continuous with what it was. This nuanced understanding of identity provides hope that is grounded rather than fantastic. The philosophical depth of the series' treatment of identity, its willingness to engage with difficult questions without pretending to have easy answers, distinguishes it from most animated entertainment. The series trusts its viewers to think alongside it, to wrestle with the same questions the characters wrestle with, to come away not with solutions, but with better tools for thinking. The relationship between Fionna and Simon develops through the series into something that neither of them has had before. A connection based on mutual recognition of damage, on shared understanding of what it means to be stuck, on the companionship of two broken people who see each other clearly. This is not romantic love and not quite family, but something that has elements of both without being reducible to either. They need each other in ways that do not follow conventional categories. Simon's role in Fionna's life is complicated by his status as her creator, by the fact that the person he is talking to exists because a damaged version of himself imagined her into being. He cannot fully escape responsibility for who she is, cannot pretend that her patterns have nothing to do with him, cannot relate to her as simply another person when their relationship includes this strange form of causation. But he can offer her what he has: understanding, presence, the companionship of someone who is also struggling, and who does not judge her struggle, because his own struggle has taught him that judgment helps nothing. Fionna's role in Simon's life is the role of purpose when purpose has been lost, the role of something that matters when nothing has seemed to matter, the role of a reason to keep going when grief has made continuing feel pointless. She does not cure his grief, or replace Betty, or make his suffering end. She gives him something to do with his suffering, something to be besides a person in pain, something to focus on besides the loss that has consumed him. This is not solution, but it is help, not fix, but forward motion. The trust that develops between them, slowly and with setbacks, represents for both of them the possibility of connection they had given up on. Simon has been isolated by his grief, unable to relate to others who do not understand what he has lost and why losing it was unbearable. Fionna has been isolated by her self-sabotage, unable to maintain connections because her patterns always eventually destroy them. Together, they find something that survives their individual pathologies, a relationship that works despite everything that should make it impossible. The ways they challenge each other, pushing back against the patterns that keep each other stuck, represent the constructive potential of their relationship. Simon can see Fionna's self-sabotage from outside, can name it in ways she cannot name it for herself, can offer perspective that her defenses prevent her from accessing alone. Fionna can see Simon's grief paralysis from outside, can invite him toward movement. He cannot initiate himself, can offer purpose that his suffering has made him unable to generate. The danger that they might enable each other instead of helping each other might find in their shared dysfunction a reason not to change is present throughout the series as a possibility that does not fully actualize. They could use each other as excuses. They could support each other's stuckness. They could build a relationship based on mutual acceptance of their worst patterns. The series shows moments when this danger is real and other moments when they manage to help each other instead, navigating between enabling and challenging in ways that real relationships require. The final form their relationship takes, whatever the series provides as conclusion, will not be static, but will represent a moment in an ongoing process. They will continue to affect each other after the adventure ends, will continue to challenge and support and sometimes enable each other, will continue to figure out how to be in relationship with someone who knows them fully. The relationship is not a destination, but a way of traveling, not an answer, but a context in which answers might be found. The model of relationship the series offers through Fionna and Simon is one based not on mutual completion, but on mutual accompaniment, not on two halves making a whole, but on two wholes learning to travel together. Neither saves the other. Neither fixes the other. They simply stay with each other through difficulty. Offer what can be offered while accepting that what can be offered is not everything. Build something real from imperfect materials. The vulnerability they show each other, the willingness to be seen in their damage rather than hiding it, creates intimacy that their defenses usually prevent. Simon lets Fionna see his grief rather than pretending he is handling it. Fionna lets Simon see her self-sabotage rather than pretending she has her life together. This mutual visibility, this refusal to perform wellness they do not feel, is what makes their connection real rather than merely pleasant. The growth that happens in relationship, the ways they become better for knowing each other, is growth that neither could achieve alone. Simon's engagement with Fionna's struggles pulls him out of his own grief enough to function. Fionna's relationship with Simon gives her evidence that connection is possible for someone like her. They provide each other with experiences their individual patterns would have prevented. The question of what happens to their relationship after the adventure, when the extraordinary circumstances that brought them together give way to ordinary life, is one the series may or may not address directly. Adventures end, ordinary life resumes. The relationships forged in crisis must find new forms to survive in mundane conditions. Whether Fionna and Simon's connection can make this transition is uncertain, but the attempt to make it is part of what the series values. The broader message about human connection that emerges from their relationship is that broken people can help each other, that damage does not disqualify from relationship, but can actually be the basis for it, that recognizing each other's struggles creates bonds that pretending to be okay never could. This message is hopeful without being sentimental, offering connection not as cure but as companionship, not as solution but as solidarity. The unconventionality of their relationship, its resistance to easy categorization, reflects something true about how meaningful connections actually work. Not all significant relationships fit into standard boxes. Some of the most important connections are the hardest to name, involve people who matter to each other in ways that do not have ready labels. Fionna and Simon's relationship is valuable partly because it does not fit, because it had to be created rather than found, because it represents a form of connection that neither of them knew was possible. The investment they make in each other, the ways they prioritize each other's well-being even when it costs them, demonstrates that their connection is real rather than merely convenient. They choose each other repeatedly, not because they have to, but because they want to, because what they have found together is worth protecting, because the relationship has become important enough to justify sacrifice. The limitations of their relationship, the ways they cannot fully understand each other, despite their recognition, keep the series honest about what connection can provide. Simon's grief remains his own, even as Fionna witnesses it. Fionna's self-sabotage remains her own, even as Simon names it. They are together, but still separate, connected, but still individual companions who travel together, rather than merged beings who share everything. This is what real relationships are: partial, imperfect, valuable anyway. The hope their relationship offers is not that broken people can fix each other, but that broken people can be with each other while broken, can accompany each other through difficulty, can find value in connection that does not solve problems but makes them more bearable. This is a modest hope, but a realistic one, grounded in what the series has shown is actually possible rather than in what fantasy would prefer. The ending of Fionna and Cake, whatever specific form it takes, must address the question of whether change is possible for people who have spent their lives stuck in patterns they did not choose and cannot seem to escape. The series has spent its runtime exploring two characters defined by their stuckness. Simon paralyzed by grief, Fionna trapped in self-sabotage. The ending must say something about whether their journeys have moved them, whether the adventure has changed them, whether they are different now than when they started. This is the question that viewers who identify with their struggles are waiting to have answered. The series cannot promise that change is easy, because it has spent its entire runtime showing that change is hard. Simon's grief does not evaporate because he found purpose in helping Fionna. Fionna's self-sabotage does not dissolve because she had adventures across the multiverse. The patterns that defined them when the series began remain present, remain active, remain part of who they are. Any ending that pretended otherwise would betray everything the series has built, would offer false comfort that viewers would recognize as false. What the series can offer, and what an honest ending would provide, is evidence that change has begun, that movement has happened, that the characters are somewhere different from where they started, even if they have not arrived at any final destination. Simon is still grieving, but he is also engaging with life in ways his grief had prevented. Fionna is still prone to self-sabotage, but she is also aware of her patterns in ways that create space for different choices. The change is real without being complete, significant without being total, hopeful without being naive. The return to ordinary life after the adventure ends represents the real test of whatever change has occurred. Adventures create conditions that are different from everyday existence, that demand engagement in ways ordinary life does not, that suspend the usual patterns because the usual context is absent. The question is whether the changes that happen during the adventure can survive translation back to normal circumstances, whether Fionna will sabotage herself again when she is back in her grey world, whether Simon will collapse back into paralysis when he no longer has a quest to give him purpose. The series may or may not answer this question directly. It may leave the future uncertain, may end at a moment of possibility rather than a moment of resolution, may trust viewers to understand that the question cannot be answered within the runtime of any story, because it is a question that can only be answered by living. Either choice is valid. Either choice respects the complexity the series has established. The ending is not about providing certainty, but about providing an honest stopping point in an ongoing process. The relationships that have formed through the adventure between Fionna and Simon, between Fionna and Gary, between all the characters who have come to matter to each other, represent the series' most hopeful statement about what helps people change. Connection does not cure, but it does support. Relationship does not fix, but it does provide context for repair. The characters are not saved by each other, but they are accompanied by each other, and accompaniment turns out to be what makes the difference between stuck and moving. The question of whether Fionna and Simon's relationship will survive the end of the adventure, whether their connection is adventure-specific or something more durable, remains open in ways that reflect the genuine uncertainty of all new relationships. They found each other under extraordinary circumstances. Ordinary circumstances will test whether what they found can persist, whether the recognition and trust they developed can survive translation to everyday life, whether they will remain important to each other when they are no longer facing cosmic threats together. The possibility that the adventure was a beginning rather than a complete story, that what happened represents the start of change rather than change accomplished, is the most honest way to understand what the series offers. Beginnings are valuable even when they do not guarantee outcomes. Starting is necessary even when finishing is uncertain. The adventure started something for both Fionna and Simon, and starting is what they needed most, what their stuckness had prevented, what the series provides as its gift to characters and viewers alike. The return to Fionna's world, to the grey reality where magic does not exist and adventure is not possible, represents the crucial test. Can she carry what she learned into a context that does not support it? Can she maintain the changes in an environment that shaped the patterns she is trying to change? The series may or may not show this return, may end at the adventure's conclusion, or follow the characters back to ordinary life. Either choice makes a statement about what stories can and should provide. The ambiguity the ending maintains, if it maintains ambiguity, is not failure, but respect for the genuine uncertainty of human change. Stories that end with certainty lie about how life works. Stories that end with ambiguity acknowledge what is true, that we never know if change will last, that patterns reassert themselves unexpectedly, that the work is never finished even when it seems to be going well. An ambiguous ending trusts viewers to understand this, to not need false reassurance, to be able to sit with uncertainty, because uncertainty is what is actually available. The hope the ending offers is not that everything will be fine, but that everything might be fine. Not that the characters are saved, but that saving remains possible. Not that the work is done, but that the work is worth doing. This is modest hope, but it is honest hope, grounded in what the series has actually shown rather than in what wishful thinking would prefer. The series earns this hope by not claiming more than it has demonstrated, by letting the evidence speak rather than making promises the evidence does not support. The message for viewers who are stuck, who identify with Fionna's self-sabotage or Simon's grief or both, is that they too might change, that their patterns too might yield, that their futures too remain open even when they feel closed. The series does not promise this will happen. It shows that it can happen, and showing is enough is what stories at their best provide. is the gift that fiction offers to those who need to see possibility before they can believe in it. The specific changes we see in Fionna and Simon by the series' end, whatever those changes are, matter less than the fact that change has occurred at all. The direction matters more than the distance. The movement matters more than the destination. They are different than they were, even if they are not yet who they might eventually become. This is progress, even if it does not look like triumph. Growth, even if it does not look like transformation. Change, even if it does not look like the changes stories usually celebrate. The audience who has travelled with these characters through their struggles deserves an ending that honours the journey, that acknowledges what has been hard about it, that does not pretend the resolution is simpler than it is. An honest ending is a gift, even when it is not a happy ending, even when it leaves questions unanswered and futures uncertain. The series has been honest throughout. An honest ending is what its integrity requires. The emotional resonance of the ending, however it resolves, comes from the investment viewers have made in characters who feel real because their struggles feel real. We want Fionna to change because we have seen how much her patterns cost her. We want Simon to find peace because we have seen how much his grief has taken from him. These wants are not guaranteed satisfaction, but the wanting itself is the series' accomplishment, the proof that its characters have come alive in ways that make their fates matter. The wisdom Fionna and Cake offers about self-destruction is that it makes sense from the inside, even when it looks senseless from the outside. Fionna's patterns are not random but logical, not irrational, but following a rationality that protects against fears more terrible than the damage the protection causes. Understanding this does not make the patterns acceptable, but it does make them comprehensible, does explain why simply deciding to stop does not work, does reveal why change requires more than willpower and good intentions. The series treats self-sabotage with compassion rather than judgment, recognizes that the person trapped in destructive patterns is suffering rather than choosing to suffer, acknowledges that the patterns developed for reasons, even if those reasons no longer apply. This compassionate stance does not excuse the damage self-sabotage causes, but it does contextualize it, does make it possible to work with rather than against the self that is struggling, does create conditions under which change becomes more rather than less possible. The insight that self-protection can become self-destruction, that defenses can cause more harm than what they defend against, that safety can become its own form of danger, is one the series develops carefully through Fionna's arc. She is not choosing to be miserable. She is choosing to be safe, and safety, as she has defined it, requires avoiding the vulnerability that happiness would demand. Her misery is a side effect of her safety strategy, not a goal she is pursuing. Understanding this reframes her struggle in ways that make it more addressable. The fear beneath the self-sabotage, the terror that drives the protective patterns, is fear of vulnerability, fear of being seen, fear of wanting something and not getting it, fear of hoping and being disappointed. These fears are real and reasonable given her history. The problem is not that she fears, but that her fears have become so dominant that they prevent the very experiences that might teach her that vulnerability can be survivable, that being seen does not always lead to rejection, that hope sometimes leads to fulfillment rather than disappointment. The adventure provides experiences that challenge her fears without directly confronting them, that show her she can survive vulnerability because the adventure demands it, that demonstrate she can be seen and accepted because her companions see and accept her. These experiences do not eliminate her fears, but they provide counter-evidence, give her something to set against the evidence her fears have accumulated, create the possibility of a different relationship to the vulnerability she has always fled. The series suggests that self-destruction can be addressed not by attacking it directly, but by creating conditions under which it becomes less necessary, not by forcing change, but by providing experiences that make change possible, not by demanding that someone stop being afraid, but by showing them that what they fear is survivable. This is gentler than the usual approach to self-destruction, and perhaps more effective, meeting people where they are, rather than insisting they be somewhere else before help can begin. The practical implications for viewers who recognize themselves in Fiona's patterns are significant. The series offers not a cure, but a map, not a solution, but a way of understanding. It suggests that self-sabotage makes sense, that understanding why you do it is the first step toward doing it differently, that compassion for yourself is not incompatible with wanting to change. For viewers trapped in patterns they cannot seem to escape, this reframing might itself be the beginning of something different. The distinction the series draws between understanding and excusing is important for anyone working on self-destructive patterns. Understanding why you sabotage yourself does not make sabotage acceptable. It makes sabotage addressable. You cannot change what you do not understand. You can change what you understand slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and failures along the way. The understanding is not the end but the beginning, not the solution but the precondition for solution. The role that others play in Fiona's potential change, the support she receives from Cake and Simon and Gary, models what help can look like for viewers who are wondering whether they should accept help or whether help is even possible. Help is possible. Help is not sufficient. Both things are true. Others can support your change, but cannot create it. Others can believe in you, but cannot want change on your behalf. The series shows help that works because it shows help that has limits, that acknowledges what it cannot do while doing what it can. The question of whether viewers should seek professional help, whether their patterns require more than self-understanding and supportive relationships, is one the series does not directly address, but that its honest treatment of difficulty implicitly raises. Fiona's patterns are serious. They have damaged her life significantly. They do not yield to simple interventions. Viewers whose patterns are similarly serious might take from the series the recognition that serious patterns deserve serious attention, that there is no shame in needing more help than fiction can provide. The compassion the series extends to its struggling characters is compassion it extends by implication to its struggling viewers. If Fiona deserves understanding rather than judgment, so do viewers who share her patterns. If Simon deserves patience rather than demands for quick recovery, so do viewers who share his grief. The series models how to relate to suffering, not by fixing it immediately, not by pretending it is not there, but by accompanying it with attention and care and the belief that it can eventually change. The art of self-destruction that the title names is art that can be replaced by other art, skill in damaging oneself that can become skill in building oneself, expertise in failure that can become expertise in something else. This reframing suggests that the capacities that produce self-sabotage are not inherently destructive, but have been turned toward destructive ends. That the same intensity and persistence and creativity could serve different purposes if redirected. The self-destroyer is not someone without abilities, but someone whose abilities have been misdirected. The question of what Fionna's abilities might build if they were not building her own destruction is one the series opens but does not fully answer. She is capable, she is creative. She has skills that her self-sabotage has hidden even from herself. The adventure reveals these capacities, shows that she can do things she did not know she could do, demonstrates that the person who has been so effective at self-destruction could be equally effective at something else if she chose to redirect her effectiveness. The same is true for viewers who recognize their own patterns in Fionna's. The energy that goes into maintaining self-destructive patterns is real energy that could go elsewhere. The creativity that finds ways to sabotage is real creativity that could build instead. The persistence that keeps returning to the same harmful choices is real persistence that could keep returning to healthier ones. Self-destruction is a misdirection of capacities that could be used differently. Recognizing this is itself the beginning of redirection. The series ends its treatment of self-destruction not with a cure, but with an understanding, not with a solution, but with a reframing that makes solution more possible. This is what good analysis provides. Not answers, but better questions. Not fixes, but clearer vision of what needs fixing. Not the end of work, but the beginning of work that has a chance of succeeding because it understands what it is working with. The viewer who finishes Fionna and Cake with a better understanding of their own patterns has received something valuable, even if they have not received a cure. Understanding is the foundation on which cure, if it comes, will be built. The series provides that foundation and trusts viewers to build on it in their own ways, at their own pace, through their own processes. The final message Fionna and Cake offers is that being stuck is not permanent, that patterns can change, that the self you are now is not the self you will always be. This message is not naive optimism, because the series has shown how hard change is, how persistent patterns are, how much work is required to move even a little. But it is hopeful because it insists that movement is possible, that the work can produce results, that the stuck place is not forever, even when it feels like forever. The series earns its hopefulness by first earning its darkness, by honestly depicting the suffering that self-sabotage and grief create, by not flinching from how bad things can get and how long they can stay bad. The hope that emerges from this darkness is credible because the darkness was credible, feels real because the suffering was real, provides comfort because it acknowledges what needs comforting rather than pretending there is nothing wrong. The choice to frame the series around characters who are older than typical animated protagonists, characters in their late 20s and older rather than children or teenagers, makes its themes more immediately relevant to viewers who have already accumulated patterns, who have already spent years stuck, who have already begun to wonder if change is possible for them or only for people whose lives have not yet solidified. The series says to these viewers, it is not too late, you are not too old, the patterns are not too established, change remains possible even for you. The multiverse setting, with its infinite versions of familiar characters, supports this message by showing that identity is not fixed, that the same person can become radically different things depending on circumstances and choices, that who you are now is only one of many possibilities you contain. This is liberating for viewers who feel trapped by their current selves, who believe they are stuck with who they have become, who have given up on becoming anyone else. The multiverse says, you are larger than you think, contain more than you know, are not limited to the version you currently inhabit. The connection between Fionna and Simon, between two people stuck in different ways who help each other move, models what support can look like without promising that support is sufficient. They matter to each other. They cannot save each other. Both things are true. The series holds this tension, refuses to resolve it in either direction, insists that relationships are important, and also that relationships have limits. For viewers who are looking for someone to save them, this is a correction. For viewers who are trying to save someone, this is a permission to stop. For everyone, this is a realistic portrait of what help actually looks like. The art of destroying your own life, the title suggests, is an art, something that requires skill and practice and development over time. It is not random, but crafted, not accidental, but achieved. Understanding this provides a strange kind of respect for the patterns, acknowledges the work that has gone into building them, recognizes that undoing them will require comparable work. The title does not mock self-destruction, but names it clearly, does not judge it, but describes it, does not pretend it is anything other than what it is. Sleep approaches as this analysis ends, the night deepening around whoever is listening, the dark providing space for thoughts that the day keeps busy. Fionna and Cake offers something to take into that darkness. The knowledge that stuck is not permanent, that patterns can change, that the self-destruction that feels like fate is actually art that can be unlearned and replaced with different art. This knowledge is not cure, but it is company, not solution, but solidarity, not the end of suffering, but the assurance that suffering need not be the whole story. The characters of Fionna and Cake will continue their lives beyond what the series shows, will continue struggling with the patterns that define them, will continue working toward changes that may or may not come. This continuation is realistic rather than disappointing, honest rather than unsatisfying, true to how life actually works rather than how stories usually end. The ending is not an ending, but a pause, a moment when the camera stops watching but the lives continue, a recognition that resolution belongs to stories and life just keeps going. The series stands as a document of a particular kind of struggle, a record of what it looks like to be stuck and to try to become unstuck, a companion for those going through similar processes. It does not solve the problem it depicts. It accompanies the problem, keeps company with those who experience it, offers the comfort of recognition and the hope of possibility. This is what the best stories do, not fix but accompany, not cure but witness, not resolve but acknowledge. The choice to end the main Adventure Time franchise with this particular story, with these particular themes of self-destruction and grief and the possibility of change, suggests that the creators wanted to leave viewers with something more mature than the original series offered. The original was about childhood adventure. This is about adult struggle. The original assumed growth would happen naturally. This acknowledges that growth requires work that might not succeed. The evolution is appropriate for characters and viewers who have grown older, who have accumulated patterns, who need something different from what they needed when they were young. The rewatchability of the series, its capacity to offer different things on different viewings, reflects the layered nature of what it explores. First viewing might focus on plot, on the adventure across the multiverse, on the confrontations with villains and the resolution of threats. Later viewings might focus on the psychological, on the patterns and their origins, on the subtle ways characters change or fail to change. The series rewards attention and repays it with depth that reveals itself gradually. The community of viewers who have found meaning in Fionna and Cake who have recognized themselves in its characters, who have taken comfort from its acknowledgement of their struggles, represents the series' real impact. Numbers matter less than depth of connection. Awards matter less than the message someone sends, saying the series helped them understand themselves. The series exists not just as entertainment, but as intervention, as something that enters people's lives and changes how they see themselves and their possibilities. Sleep well. You are not the only one who has mastered the art of destroying your own life. You are not the only one who has built patterns that protect you from what you need. You are not the only one who looks at your existence and sees something that has gone wrong in ways you cannot name. Fionna knows. Simon knows. The series knows. And knowing is the beginning of something, not the end of everything, but the start of the possibility that things might be different. Not will be, might be. And might be is enough to justify continuing, enough to justify the work, enough to justify sleep, that will lead to waking, that will lead to another day in which change remains possible, even if it does not happen today. The night accepts all of this, holds the possibility and the uncertainty, makes space for both the hope and the fear. Fionna and Cake has done what it can do, shown that stuck is not forever, that patterns can yield, that change is possible even when it seems impossible. What happens next is up to whoever is listening, whoever is struggling, whoever is wondering if their own art of self-destruction can ever become something else. The series has shown that it can. Whether it will is a question each viewer must answer for themselves, in their own time, through their own work, with whatever support they can find and whatever courage they can muster. Sleep well.